بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى ال سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Inshallah, I will request all those who are outside to come inside, and those who are sitting before the away to come closer, and all those who attend the weekly Seerah sessions sitting right in front. Inshallah, the question is inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى جل جلاله. وعلمنا والصلاه والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى اله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا الى يوم الدين اما بعد. ما شاء الله, every week Maulana Hamza tells you about the Seerah, and today I happen to be here, so he's given me the responsibility of continuing that discussion of the migration of the Prophet. So what had happened by now, the whole history. See, every event, mostly every event of the Prophet ﷺ has a lesson in it for all of us. Some events have even more lessons because they're very, very important and significant events. And to be honest, Hijrah, migration, is one of the most significant events of the Prophet ﷺ's life, and it has a lot of lessons for us. So firstly, let us talk about the event, because the Islamic calendar is attached to that. As in, that's when the Islamic calendar begins. That was a discussion, that was a decision that was taken later, not when the migration took place. But what had happened is the Quraysh had tried everything in Makkah to try to stop the Prophet ﷺ. But this was a new idea, and they just did not know how to deal with it. They did not know how to confront it. It was a very, very powerful idea, the powerful idea of the belief in the one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they were mushrikeen, they were polytheists, they wouldn't deny Allah, but they used to ascribe partners to Allah. So they believed in the Supreme Allah, but they just believed in lots of other gods with it, and they felt that they needed all of that, and you could not get directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when they saw that so many people were embracing Islam, to such a degree that after Umar radiallahu anhu's story, which I think you guys have done, after Umar radiallahu anhu's story, he becomes Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ actually made a dua that, oh Allah, strengthen this faith with one of the two Umars or Amars. So there's Amr ibn Hisham and Umar ibn Khattab. Amr and Umar in Arabic come from the same roots. They both mean similar things. The concept of Amr, Umar, Amir, Imran, Ammar, all of that comes from the meaning of developing something, establishing something, generating something. And so the interesting thing about Umar and Amr ibn Hisham was Abu Jahl, and Umar ibn Khattab. There were many leaders of the Quraysh, but these two were the no-nonsense ones. They were the ones who were the go-get-it ones. If they said they wanted something, they would go and do so. So Umar radiallahu anhu, he was about to go out to kill the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but obviously he becomes a Muslim. Now what happens is that the Quraysh, they just don't know what to do. So they have a very important meeting. They set up very, very important meeting in their place where they had meetings. And the meeting was that how do we deal with this issue? We need to really deal Islam a final blow that will get rid of this nuisance, according to them, from us. Remember, usually situation becomes worse before it becomes better. There were many people that there were many of the Prophet Prophet's followers that were persecuted. The Prophet himself was persecuted before it became any better. It's always struggles, you have to remember that. It doesn't come easy. Today we're facing struggles for the last 4 or 5 days or the last week in different parts of the country. But struggles means that something's happening. There's a positive way to look at it. While we don't want these things to happen, we don't want these attacks to come against the Muslims, obviously, because there's property loss, there's lives lost, there's just an unnecessary reason for this. But in the grand scheme of things, when you see the cycle of the way movements come and rise, there's always opposition, and then opposition intensifies, becomes stronger before it becomes better. Because there's always a final blow that they try to. So they were getting really aggravated. So they kept this meeting, what should we do? Now, the Prophet Prophet's family, the Banu Hashim, were very powerful family, so you couldn't just go and attack them. Because in those days, it was the tribal mentality. That meant that if somebody touched anybody from your tribe, whether it was your tribe members' fault and crime, you would have to support them. Unsur akhaka zaliman aw mazluman. Assist your brother, whether he's the oppressor or whether he's the oppressed one. So you got somebody in your family, God forbid, who's a drug dealer, you have to go and support him. Right? It was a really strong tribal mentality. It was so strong, this affinity and this bond, is that there's some positives that came out of that. When the call of the Prophet ﷺ had reached Yathrib, Medina Munawwara, there were 2 major Arab communities there. Essentially, they were the Arabs, the population there, aside from the 3 tribes of the Jews. There were 3 tribes of Jews, and then there were the 2 Arab tribes, the Banu Qayla. They both were related as Banu Qayla, but then they had split up as Banu, the Aus and the Khazraj. One of their leaders becomes Muslim, so the whole tribe becomes Muslim. Can you believe that? Today there's children who don't want to think alike as their parents. They don't want to carry on the business of their hard work that they fought, unless it's one where you just have to sit and collect money and spend it. Then everybody wants to take that business. But if it's a complicated business, then nobody's interested in that. Parents are struggling with their children to get them to think alike. Anyway, but in those days, if the tribal leader, Sa'd ibn Ubadah, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, become Muslim, the whole tribe follows. They change their ideology. It's not like, okay, the tribe leaders want this coat or this jacket, or he likes the color red, so we're going to. No, it's a belief. They stick on the belief. Can you imagine how powerful that is? Right? It was definitely not time for individualism as it is now. Right? So that was the tribal mentality. So they decided, they made a mashwara. Now, it's really interesting that in many meetings, crucial meetings against Muslims, Shaitan comes in, dressed as an old man from Najd. Najd is one of the provinces of Saudi Arabia today, in the east, right, towards Iraq, in that region. And the Prophet had prophesied that fitnas will come from that direction. It's really interesting. They're known for their harshness and so on. The shaitan would appear as a Najdi old man to give literally the worst suggestion or option, meaning the most effective, the most evil suggestion. So the suggestion that was given here, everybody's meeting like, what should we do now? So then the suggestion that was given was that let us take a young man, strong young man from every tribe of Makkah, aside from Banu Hashim, aside from the Prophet's tribe, one man, and they will then attack the Prophet ﷺ at night and just finish him off. Now, why did they want to choose a person from every tribe? So that if the Banu Hashim, which was a powerful tribe, wanted them to take revenge, they'd have to take revenge against everybody, all the tribes. There's one representative of every tribe. That's something they're not going to do. They can't. They're not powerful. So then they would just settle on a ransom instead, a deal, as they call it, the ransom instead. So it's a well thought out plan. But interestingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in mentioning Surah Al-Anfal, وَإِذْ يَمْكُرُ بِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِيُثْبِتُوكَ أَوْ يَقْتُلُوكَ أَوْ يُخْرِجُوكَ وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. And they had planned to do a few options to do this or that, kill you, to get you out, evict you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes His own plan. So at the concurrent time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finally allowed the Prophet ﷺ to migrate himself. Already people were migrating. Secretly. They were escaping Makkah Mukarramah from Medina Munawwara because the Prophet ﷺ had made an agreement with the tribes in Medina Munawwara that they would provide him the sanctuary and everybody that came. So slowly people had started leaving. Umar radiallahu anhu, when he left, he did not leave secretly. He went to the edge of town and he turned around and he said, who wants his mum to become a widow, his child to become orphans, and a few other statements like that? Follow me beyond this valley. Nobody was there because he was just a very, very strong and powerful leader. So he's one of the few that went openly, but everybody else had to go secretly. They didn't want people to go there. They didn't want their people to diminish. Anyway, so the Prophet ﷺ was given permission to now make migration. Now, in those days, and even nowadays, at lunchtime, at peak, not lunchtime, we call it lunchtime, at peak noontime, when the sun is at its highest, nobody used to come out. It's not a time when if you go out, I remember about 25 years ago, I went to Dubai, and I only had one and a half days there, or 2 days. And I had to do some shopping. So I'm going out in the middle of the day when in those days things used to be closed. And you get sweat and you literally get soaked within 5 minutes and you're crazy going out at this time. Nowadays with all the AC in the malls and taxis and everything's AC, it's become the same day and night. But that's how it was. Nobody used to go out. The Prophet covered his face, came out to Abu Bakr's house. Nobody used to come out. And he goes and knocks on the door of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu this peak afternoon, and Aisha radiallahu anhu, she's not, she is not with the Prophet ﷺ, living with him yet, and her sister Asma radiallahu anha, and the Prophet ﷺ came to us at a time when usually nobody would come. He would never come at this time. And the purpose of this was to tell Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, I have now been given permission to leave. For my mission, would you like to come along? And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he had this very special connection with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, when you have a connection and you're so close to somebody, you love them a lot, you develop this kind of second instinct about that person. So you kind of think like them, and in some cases people speak like them, and you might even start looking like them. In fact, ulama have actually done this study on up to 70 different aspects of how Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had become similar to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They interestingly call this nisbah ittihad, right? This really interesting thing that happens between two people. Sometimes if a husband and wife really love one another, they start talking like one another, etc. Anyway, we don't have time to go into all of these side issues. But he had already got 2 animals ready, 2 solid animals ready, because he had this idea that we're going to migrate soon, and I might just get this opportunity to be with the Prophet ﷺ. He had it already. That tells us that preparation, advanced preparation. You don't wait for the issue to happen and then you start scrambling, but you prepare in advance, you take precaution. Right? That's very important, especially for us in the climate that we find ourselves right now. You do take precaution. You don't go and do anything crazy, but you definitely take precaution. Anyway, so he was overjoyed wow, this is like my dua being accepted. He said, Prophet, absolutely, I've already got everything prepared. Now, he had it so well prepared. So that was the same day that the night, the night following that, that's when the Quraysh had planned to kill the Prophet. Now the Prophet gets Ali radiallahu anhu, he has to give a sacrifice. His sacrifice is that he sleeps in the bed of the Prophet with the Prophet's sheet, acting like the Prophet. So when people peek in, they see somebody sleeping there, they think the Prophet is there before the time that they're going to come in to assassinate him. Now the Prophet slips out that night while Ali radiallahu anhu is in his bed, and as you probably heard this, that he gets a bit of dust and he's told to throw this in the faces, because it's all dark, right? In the faces of those young guys who are waiting to assassinate him. And they don't see anything. It's like they become blindfolded. And he walks right through them. Right? And so on. He just goes through, and mashallah, they decide to meet. Now, this is something you have to understand. Makkah Mukarramah is in the south, in the Hijaz region of Arabia. It's in the south. And 4 hours north today, by car, 4 hours north is Medina Munawwara. So Medina Munawwara is in the north. And then many hours beyond that is Masjid al-Aqsa, right? So everything's in the north side. Makkah Mukarramah is in the south. Below that, then you get to Yemen eventually, right? But Medina Munawwara is in the north. So if you're going to escape to Medina Munawwara and migrate to Medina Munawwara, you will go north. But the Prophet goes south, right? So it's a short distance south. Nowadays it takes about 20 minutes to 30 minutes to go, and in those days it probably took longer. So him and Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, they go south, and that's where this huge mountains. I haven't climbed this one. I've climbed the other one, which is Hijrah, where the Prophet got his first revelation. This is the Thawr, the cave of Thawr, which is much higher. I don't know how many meters it is, if anybody knows, but it's much, much higher than is Hijrah. If you've been up, Hijrah takes about good, walk, unless you're running up, good walk will take about 50 minutes to get there, right? The other one, maybe it'll take, I don't know, does anybody know? Has anybody been up? Anyway, so there's a cave up there, so that's where they go. That's where they go, and they stay there for 3 days. Now, Makkah Mukarramah, the people there, they don't want the Prophet to leave, because they know that if he escapes, he's going to get a sanctuary somewhere. He's going to develop himself, strengthen himself, find the basis, and then it's out of their hands. So they find out the Prophet has disappeared, because what happens in the morning is when those people want to attack the Prophet, it's actually Ali radiallahu anhu that comes out of it. One of the second reasons that Ali radiallahu anhu is kept there is because he's a close family member of the Prophet. The Prophet, despite all of this opposition and hatred against him, he was still the one that they trusted with their wealth, which is kind of really crazy idea. Right? That tells us something that, you may be, as Muslims, may be despised for no reason, but we must have a quality and something to offer that everybody recognizes, despite the fact that they might have some superficial or fabricated reason to hate you. That's the real reason that they should actually. He was called the Amin, and the one who was trusted. So now what happens is Ali radiallahu anhu is responsible to return everybody's possessions back. Now the Prophet could have thought, okay, these guys are all against me, let me just take everything, it's permissible, right? A lot of people find a shaitani justification in these kind of cases. You have something or someone, and they start creating bad blood between you, causing quarrel. Like, okay, he's done this bad to me, I can actually keep this, we can't. That's a different contract. Anyway, so now finally, they go out to look. Now they're expert trackers. They can check things, using footprints and so on. So they do get to this place, this Ghar. So they climb up. It's not an easy climb, as I mentioned. So they climb up there because somehow something must have pointed that they're there. So they climb all the way up. Now apparently, I haven't been to this cave, but the way it's explained, at least in those days, is that the cave has an entry which is more at foot level. So it's a cave that goes down. So it's not on ground level as such. So when you get up to the top, you have to actually go down into it. So if you're standing in the cave, then your face will be probably parallel to the opening. And if anybody's outside, they'll have to look down through the opening to look into the cave. But the interesting stories, you've probably heard these mentioned, is that's where you have a bird that has a nest suddenly turn up, right, with a nest that usually takes, quite a few days, and suddenly there's a nest there with a bird. There is a spider web at the mouth of the cave, and spiders do not spin webs within a few hours like that. It takes much longer. It looks old and everything. So they come there and they think, well, he might be there because it looks like all the signs are leading them. Everything that to track them, all of the signs are leading to this cave, but he can't be in the cave because you've got a bird's nest here. You've got the opening of the mouth of the cave covered with the spider web. It can't be there. It doesn't make any sense. And they're obviously discussing this, and Abu Bakr is very, very frightened. Not for himself, but for the Prophet ﷺ. That's when some of the most amazing things happen. And I think that's where the Prophet ﷺ got what he got from the Prophet ﷺ in these close encounters. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, why are you worried about this? La tahzan inna Allah ma'ana. Don't grieve because Allah is with us. The Prophet ﷺ is using all of these tactics to evade them, but he's still got his trust in Allah. So now the question is that why wasn't he just picked up like Isa and transported to Medina Munawwara? Why did he have to do all of this? But yet he's so sure that they're not going to catch him. It's ajib. Only the Prophet can answer that question. You understand what I'm saying? He's 100% sure nothing's going to happen. So he tells Abu Bakr, don't worry, Allah is with us. Of course, the whole thing is to teach the Ummah that you have to go through struggles. Your faith is so valuable. There's a struggle you have to go through. And the ultimate ending of that is going to be that Allah is going to help you. But Allah has not promised that you're going to get this easy. That's one thing He's not promised. What He has promised is that ultimately the hereafter is going to be easy. And your end is going to be easy because this world is a temporary world, the real world is hereafter. So it's very interesting. There's many more details. I mean, we'll be here for a few days if we were to go through, I'll leave the rest of my answer. But there's the story that when they entered the cave, there were holes, because caves could be inhabited by various different scorpions and snakes and things like that. Abu Bakr managed to plug all the holes so that nothing would come out. They knew how to do these things anyway. There was one apparently that was left, and he placed his foot on there to keep it shut because there was nothing else, and he got bitten. Anyway, it carries on. There's lots of minor details that really show us that we're just going to move on. And then what happens is, so after 3 days now they leave. So they've gone south, whereas Medina Munawwara is in the north. So they go south, they finally come out after 3 days, and then they go towards the Jeddah coast. And then they go up, which is today called the Hijrah route. That is the longer route that goes past Badr, right? That's the longer route. Usually with the motorways and now you go directly, but Makkah Mukarramah, if you take a car, you're going to go directly. You don't go with this route unless you tell them you want to go that route. Now, interestingly, probably about 100 and something years ago, about 100 years ago, something. Mullah Qasim Nanotwi, rahimahullah, one of the founders of Darul, he is sought by the British. He's sought by the British because the British want him because he was part of a rebellion against the British when they were in India, right? And he went and hid. People told him, you gotta hide because they're after you, they're gonna capture you. So he went and hid. After 3 days, he comes back out and he's walking around. So I say, look, they're still after you, why are you out? He said, well, the Prophet hid for 3 days. I can't hide for any more than that. That's the sunnah, khalas, I'm out, right? I mean, only people who really love the Prophet and that want to follow that sunnah can do that. I mean, I don't know if we would do that, or we'll wait until it completely ends. Anyway, so they finally go. Now, there's a reward put onto the head of the Prophet. Anybody who finds him, because they really want to stop him from reaching Medina Munawwara. So there's a person called Seerah ibn Malik ibn Jursh. He's an expert tracker. He's known for it. So he says, you know what, I want to get that prize. So let me go for it. But what they used to do in those days, he had a slight doubt. You can tell he had a slight doubt because he says that they would use, you know, they had a quiver of arrows. They had their bow. So their arrows used to be marked differently. So in order to try to decide whether they should do something or not, should I marry her or not, should I do this business or not, should I undertake this journey or not, what do we do? Istikhara. Their istikhara as such was that they would pull out an arrow, and if it was a certain type of men, yes, and if it was green, for example, it said no. You know, that's how it was. He pulled out an arrow and it was no. But the reward was too great. So that's human greed. So it's like, even though we don't agree with all of this, you know, because that doesn't tell you anything. Allah decides what. But it came out in the negative. So he pulls out another one, and it's still negative. It was 3 times, you're still in, but he still decided to go. Told his servant to get his animal ready, his horse ready. He jumps on and he goes. He knows exactly where to go because he's expert tracker. And he then sees the Prophet ﷺ in the distance. They said that he could have fired an arrow at him. And the Prophet ﷺ says, oh Allah, suffice us. Allah, suffice us. Which means deal with him. And what happens is, suddenly, his horse literally sinks into the ground up to its stomach. So its front 2 legs sink into the ground. Now that's very unusual. It doesn't usually happen. It's like quicksand or something. Pulls himself out, pulls the horse out, and he's suspicious. He is superstitious. Right? That's why he was doing a divining arrow. So he's a superstitious guy. But you know, when the prize is too much, then unless you've got strong taqwa, then you just have to do what you have to do, right? When you have an addiction, or God forbid, always the price is too much, or you have to go get it, whatever it is. So gets his horse up, tries again. Again, his horse goes down into the ground. It's happened about 3 times, then he realizes that, you know what, I think I've exhausted all these possibilities. This is special. That's when he recognizes that the Prophet ﷺ is going to be a very special. There's going to be a very special position for him. So he waves as they say, wave a white handkerchief, right? Whatever they did, I can't remember exactly what he did, but it's equivalent to that. So the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, they meet him. And he gives them an assurance, 2 things. He said, I will go back and I will put people off the scent. Basically, I'll say that I did not find you, I'll put people off the scent so that nobody will be able to come after you, and by that time you'll get to Medina Munawwar. Number 1, I'll do that, I promise you that, but he told them to write a special agreement or you can say a peace document for him. Because now he knows that the Prophet is going to win somehow. So they write that for him. Now, Abu Bakr is very strategic. What he's done is he's got his son Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr to go around in Makkah Mukarramah to understand. He's their spy, right? He's gathering all of the information, and then he comes at night to tell them. You know, when they were in the cave, and after that, he comes to tell them. He's got Amir ibn Fuhayra, who is his shepherd, to graze his sheep wherever they were. So firstly, it was close to the cave, so they could get milk from it. So his goats or whatever it was, he would be supplying him some kind of food in the evening or whenever they could, and then he had actually hired a mushrik, a polytheist, because he was the TomTom, the Waze, the Google, what do you call it? The Google Maps to leave. He was a mushrik, but he was trustworthy. So he's the one showing them the way to make sure that they use the most efficient way to get to Medina Munawwar. So he had hired him in advance, and he had his shepherd, So it's all organized. That shows us that you have to be organized and you shouldn't just do crazy things, right? So that's why we have to be very careful nowadays with the way things are going, that people get a bit Jewish, get a bit excited just because they may be stronger at that point against a few guys who seem to want to attack, and then you go on, knock a few windows of some pubs or something like that. That doesn't really work for us in the long run. That's not showing bravery. Bravery has to be, something that's calculated. In the long run, we have to understand this, because otherwise everybody's just waiting to blame us. We put a foot wrong, even in self-defense, it's going to be a problem. So be very, very careful. So then the Prophet ﷺ gets to, mashallah, finally, without any other major events or many other setbacks, they're put off descent by Surah. So they don't know where he is. The Prophet ﷺ is on his way to Medina. No one news has already traveled. The Prophet ﷺ is coming there. So the people there, the Muslims, they're very excited. So every day they come to this. Remember, Medina is in the north. So they come to the south, where Masjid Quba is today, around the area, to wait for the Prophet ﷺ to welcome him. So every day they come and they go back. In those days, it wasn't calculated. There was no, you couldn't track somebody, tell them, okay, I'm coming at this time, you can see my live location. There's none of that kind of stuff. So one day, they had waited all morning until the sun was at its peak and you couldn't stand around out there. So then they retreated back. Now in Yathrib, which was the name of Medina Munawwara, in the south of the town, south of city, all the Jews used to have their forts. So the south of the city was very fortified with the forts of the Jews, of the Jewish tribes. That's why later on when they did that trench, it was in the north, because the south was already safe and they had an agreement with the Jews that they were protected from them. So as they had just retreated at noontime, one of the Jews who was on top of his fort, he suddenly noticed a few people coming. So he quickly shouted out to everybody and announced that the person you're waiting for, he is here. He seems to have arrived. So everybody comes out. And interestingly, that's when they started reading this طَلَعَ الْبَدْرُ عَلَيْنَا. The moon has suddenly arisen upon us. And that whole poem, طَلَعَ الْبَدْرُ عَلَيْنَا مِنْ ثَنِيَّةِ الْوَدَاعِ, which is from the ravines of Wada'. And what's after that? وَجَبَ الشُّكْرُ عَلَيْنَا. Thanks and gratitude is now become obligatory on us, binding on us, because now we have the Prophet ﷺ essentially, مَا دَعَا لِلَّهِ دَاعٍ, as long as the call. So, mashallah, they were very, very excited now because it's peak noontime. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is standing up, and he's standing up, and he might look, he's 2 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ, because interestingly he died at the same age of the Prophet ﷺ, 2 years and some months later. So though he's younger, he looks a bit older. The Prophet ﷺ had no grey hairs, so he looks older and everybody thinks he's the Prophet ﷺ. But then suddenly when the sun shifts a bit, he moves to shake the Prophet ﷺ. That's when they find out the Prophet ﷺ is actually the one sitting down. So finally he settles there in that Quba region, and there was no masjid there. And then eventually he stays there for a few days and he establishes the place for prayer there. He prays the first Jumu'ah there. There's a Masjid al-Jumu'ah nowadays, you can see it. It's just some distance away from Masjid Quba. If you're going from Medina, the Masjid to Masjid Quba, it comes on the way, right? If you're walking, you'll see it. So that's the story of the Hijrah. So what we learn from it is all of these different lessons of struggles, of sabr, and of tawakkul. The tawakkul of the Prophet ﷺ, that while I'm going to have to take all of these unusual measures, going south instead of north, right? I mean, again, it just always surprises me that with the Prophet ﷺ divinely protected, told to migrate, why he just literally walk out and go, right? Because he's protecting all of these other places, why not there? But no, that was all by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's design. Now, the person he's chosen also has an amazing amount of tawakkul, which means reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does Abu Bakr Siddiq do? Aside from all of this preparation, he takes all of his savings, all of his assets. That was 600 or 700 dirhams. That was all of his assets. His family is left in Makkah Mukarram. Now, he doesn't do this in this crazy, you can say, way that I don't care what happens to them, I just need to, he's blind, and it's not like that. It's very calculated with the trust in Allah. Get the difference between that. Some people are so fanatical, they will take all of their savings and go and like donate it somewhere, and then their family will struggle, and then after 2 months they're miserable. Right? And then they freak out. That's why people like Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah said that if you want to cut your ties with this world, don't do it in this fanatical, crazy way, because your heart isn't prepared. So you might have the vibrancy to do it right now, and then suddenly in 2 months, you start struggling and you can't deal with it. But Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, his family, you can tell how prepared they were and how connected they were. That Abu Bakr's father is alive, but he's blinded by now. Abu Quhafa, his name is, right? Radiallahu anh, he becomes Muslim. So he says when he found out that Abu Bakr had gone on to the migrated as well, he said that your father didn't leave you anything. He's left you nothing. When he found out that he's gone with a lot of stuff. Now his daughter, Abu Bakr's daughter, Asma, she was a great woman. She got some small stones that feel like coins, put them into this cubby hole in the wall, right? That where they used to keep their dirhams. Put a cloth over it. Led her grandfather to that place. Put his hand and said, "Look, my father has left all of this goodness." She says it in that elusive way, and he said, "Oh, okay, fine. If he's left that, then it's all right." So you can tell that they were prepared for this. Obviously, they followed afterwards, so it was all fine afterwards. But that is the reliance. We can't do that, unless you, us, and our families are ready for that kind of, sacrifice. So this is the sacrifice, that kind of sacrifice we're talking about. The migration was a very difficult one, and the reason is that they had to literally, because they had to leave secretly. Most people, even the Prophet, leaving secretly. Majority of people leave secretly, but literally only what they could carry with them. So you couldn't take a whole caravan of your belongings. The people of Makkah Mukarramah, they had lands, had houses. All of that had to be abandoned. That's very, very difficult to do. They had to be abandoned. I met a guy who was from Uganda. Now Uganda had a problem, just like some other countries had a problem. Malawi's had a bit of an issue. Uganda had a worse issue. The Muslims were there 50 years ago or something like that, 40 years ago, and then suddenly everything changes and people have to run away. So the guy's telling me that he knows a few people from there who lost everything, who were very wealthy, they lost everything, they're still depressed until today. While others, they just go on and they don't know any back. Allah will make it good. This is transient things of this world, temporary things of this world. They literally had to abandon everything. They had to abandon everything. That's why they have a very special reason. Why did they have to do it? For their deen. So that they could maintain their faith and for their children. Most people have migrated, most of our parents and some themselves have migrated to this country, but that's more economic migration. Not necessarily to the deen. In fact, sometimes to the detriment of their deen. And for some people it's worked out, right, for the better, right? But ultimately, the migration for the deen, that one migration is so powerful that essentially they become muhajirin. And the muhajirin have a very special place as being the forerunners to go into paradise because they abandoned everything. Literally everything. Sometimes even their families had to come later. Alhamdulillah, many of them joined, but all of their assets. That's why when they came to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ had this amazing thing of joining them up with one of the Ansar. The Ansar were the land people. The Muhajirin had to do whatever they had to do. But mashallah, they made it very well. The Prophet ﷺ did it very well. For example, with one of the wealthy migrants, Abdul Rahman Mangera was very, very wealthy. Very good, astute businessman. The Prophet knew him, obviously, so he linked him up with one of the wealthiest Ansar. I just forget his name, right? Anybody remember his name? The wealthiest Ansar, and he says, you two together, because the idea was that they support one another. So this Ansari, amazing guy, he says, I'll give you half of my wealth. Can you imagine that? That's when all of that took place, to settle them in. I'll give you half of my wealth. I've got these two wives. And I know this sounds really strange. He said, if you prefer any one of them, let me know and I'll divorce and you can marry them. Now, that sounds a bit strange. How can you just divorce your wife for somebody else? That was just that the Prophet said, I want you to, make him like a brother. So he's saying, I'm even willing to do this. It's amazing, that is. Oh, but Abdul Rahman says, you know what? I don't need anything. Just tell me where the market is. So he goes to the market and he has no money. He goes to the market and he buys a camel on credit. So he buys the camel on credit, let's just say for 100 dirhams. The camel comes with a rope. That's what it comes with, not with a saddle. It comes with a rope that you bind it with and you hold it. He takes off that rope and he sells the camel for the same price, for 100 dirhams. How much profit do you make? Whatever that rope price was, 2 dirhams or whatever. Doing that, by the end of the day, he came back with things to contribute. Achieve how these people do it. Instead of taking big loans from the bank, right? He's just doing business, he's scaling up slowly and he's giving sadaqah until he had so much that it was a crazy amount. That's Abdul Rahman Mangera story. Do you know his story? You mentioned the story here. Abdul Rahman Mangera's story is absolutely amazing. He starts off with that kind of struggle. Ultimately, he has so much that after the Prophet passes away, once Aisha is in her home, and suddenly she hears this huge commotion and noise and everything, as though an army has just come in. Who's coming? The trade caravan of Abdul Rahman Mangera. It's suddenly coming with huge profits. And it's like so many animals and everything like that. And she made a statement. She said that he's going to have to go into paradise crawling or on his knees or something like that. What gets to him that she mentioned that? And he says, no, Abdul Rahman is going to go running into paradise or walking into paradise, and he donates all of that caravan stuff. I don't know, it sounds mythical, it sounds fantastic and incredible, but the reason they could do things like that is because their assets were not in their hearts, it was in their hands. They had multiple assets, but they were not in their hearts, it was in their hands, so they could easily dispose of it if they wanted. So that's just to tell people that if you migrate and you go through, you don't have to migrate, just some struggle for your deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ultimately, the Prophet comes back into that same Makkah Mukarramah as a victim. No blood is shed. So all of these are struggles. It really, really energizes us to understand that what we are seeing, only the people with low iman is this supposed to bother. Who are on the edge. Should I stay in? Should I stay? So the Hijrah, the story, there's a lot more detail. It provides a huge amount of lessons, especially of fortitude, of struggle, of sabr, of patience, of a good outcome, of success, but all based on the reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All based on the reliance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet showed, as Abu Bakr demonstrated, and as the rest of the Muhajirin had to show where they went for their faith. Otherwise, they couldn't just stay back. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that same kind of strength. May Allah protect us. We ask for afiyat. We don't want to go through those struggles, but if push comes to shove, we're going to have to go through it. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah help us at that time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us. May Allah assist us. May Allah give us the required fortitude and tawakkul and steadfastness and resilience and the yaqeen in our heart to make that work for us. آخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.